The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Now you're welcome along, Sunday Papers. Great to have you with us. So I'll start by running you through the headlines. Liverpool feature on the back page. First off, on the Sunday Mirror, Zebri goes bananas. So Liverpool now 11 points behind Arsenal after yesterday's game. That's the back page of the Mirror. Sun Sport looking ahead to the Manchester derby today. Early warning, the early being Erling Haaland, and he says, "If I time my runs perfectly, no one can stop me." It would be arrogant if it wasn't true. So that's Erling Haaland looking ahead to the Manchester derby, and then Arsenal above that after their win against Spurs yesterday. Very impressive as well. We have the Star, which mentions Liverpool 3, Brighton 3 at the top, and then time is ticking. Pep warning to rival Ten Hag, where he knows that he's under pressure for results, as all managers are, says Guardiola. We have the Mail on Sunday then. Brian Mullins features at the very top. He was all-round class. That's Peace Inside. Paddy Cullen pays loving tribute to one of the true greats of football. We'll come to that in a moment. We have Get Rid of VAR. So various participants over the weekend thus far in the Premier League are sick of VAR. They want to see it just put to bed, including Marco Silva and Antonio Conte. And then Vera Pauw, ahead of a big week, big month for Irish football. We're at a disadvantage for being better. So her point is that Scotland and Austria face on Thursday night, which is less than 5 days before the playoffs. So the preparation for the game is obviously trickier, given that they don't know who they're playing until 5 days before the game. We feel we've been given a disadvantage for being better. And also it's away from home. So she says revenue-wise, we're missing out on revenue. But she reckons she's not the only person unhappy. Every single country is complaining about this system. I'm not the only one. So that's Vera Pauw on the back page of the Mail on Sunday. Sunday Times, big picture of Xhaka gunning for glory is the headline, and then alongside that, Lampard and Kenny hail the return of Seamus Coleman, who played for Everton yesterday. Frank Lampard delighted with how Seamus played. Nathan Patterson, of course, injured at the moment, so it allowed Coleman to get back in, and Lampard was hailing his experience and his quality, and he seemed to have a very good game on his return yesterday for Everton. And then Sunday Independent, Munster failed to impress, and there are a few match reports to that effect. Munster didn't get the bonus point against Zebre yesterday. Perfect conditions, fast track, home advantage, had scored the third try early on, and huffed and never got the fourth. And then Klopp blasts Pool's horrendous display. So Jurgen Klopp didn't think Liverpool were too good yesterday. Very happy to say Michael Verney of the Irish Independent is here in studio, as is Gary O'Toole, Olympian and orthopaedic surgeon. You're both very welcome. You're refusing to talk about Liverpool, so we can ignore all that, but I think it's looking
Thank you,
obvious.
You're so respectful of my wishes.
Great to have you in. So Brian Mullins, I suppose, is a very good jumping off point because he features across the board. There are some fantastic tributes written to Brian Mullins. I don't know which ones jumped out to you, Michael.
Yeah, the one by Micheál Clifford in the Mail definitely would. He was talking to Paddy Cullen, obviously, in recent days. It's just amazing. Like, it's just such a legendary character. Like, most of what he did happened in his career before I was even born. He was retired in 1985, brought in by Hefo in 1974 as a teenager, really out of the blue. A bit of a rugby prodigy, a bit of a cricket prodigy. Comes in 1974 as a teenager and just dominates, and is able to dominate for the course of 5 or 6 years. And obviously the car crash then, where he wasn't able to run for 18 months as well. He's just a fascinating man, a fascinating character. Micheál talks to Paddy Cullen here, and he just says one story that really sticks with him, and I think this is fascinating. This is when a player of that level just has an effect on everybody else around him in the way that they're almost mesmerised by him while he's doing feats on the pitch. So Paddy just said, what will always stick with me to this day is the gasps you could hear from the crowd inside in Croke Park when Brian and Jack O'Shea used to contest ball in the middle of the field. It was something to behold. There were times when I was so totally caught up in the sheer joy of watching this man in operation, because that was how special you felt he was. You almost forgot you were playing yourself, and you just stand back almost. I was privileged to play alongside Brian Whelan and McBurn. There's things he did on the pitch and you're just like, that's absolutely amazing, and you just forget about what you're doing. And it sounds like the same thing happened, Paddy, here. Like, I was watching a clip back from the 1979 Leinster final where Dublin are in big bother. Offaly look like they're going to finally beat them, and Brian Mullins just catches a kick out. I think he slams the ball back at Paul O'Kelly, who tackles him fairly harshly, and they needed a score, and he just walks up the pitch, passes it off to Bernard Brogan. It's a goal, Dublin win. And that was just the sort of player he was. And there's been amazing tributes over the last couple of days.
Yes. Paddy Cullen finishes with that lovely line, very sweet line, he'll always be with us.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a bond there, I suppose, which he's talking about. Colm O'Rourke, Sunday Independent. It's very hard to think of Brian Mullins and use the word was when talking about him. A colossus of a man in his prime. He says he was an indestructible force. By any standards, he compares favourably with any midfielder of the last 50 years. I regarded him and Jack O'Shea as probably the two best players of my playing days, and it was a rivalry that always attracted huge interest. My memories of Brian Mullins are of a long-haired teenager in 74, through all his Dublin years with missing teeth and a constant struggle to never give in. He did not seek publicity and had a healthy disregard for the media. Once I wrote a piece about him when he'd finished playing and listed all of his assets, as well as saying that he was occasionally dirty, awkward, cantankerous, gruff and difficult as a person. I finished it off by saying I wished he had played for Meath. Despite the fact that we were very friendly, he was furious with the article, even though I thought the whole thing was quite complimentary. It took a while for normal relations to resume, but when he had to say that was the end of it, though exchanges with him could be quite colourful. When you met him, even up to recently, it was the size of his hands that you would notice immediately. They were like rough shovels, so it was no wonder he could grab a ball with one hand and push everyone aside. It's hard to think of him in the past tense, as it only seems like last year when he dominated Croke Park. Maybe Anton O'Toole needed someone to talk football with. If that's the case, Tooler would be doing most of the listening. So that's O'Rourke playing, huge tribute to Brian Mullins as well. He was a man you knew.
Yeah, there is an irony in that piece actually where Colm, he's playing for UCD against Vincent's when Brian was at the height of his career, and there was a big rivalry there. And I met Brian through UCD, where he's been working for the last 20 years or so in the sports department there. And he was very, very involved and very, very pro student athletes. I would meet him on almost a weekly basis, just walking into the gym and stop and have a chat. And my association with him goes back from the age of 6, actually, because he went to NIHE in Limerick with my first coach, who learned her swimming technique out of a book down there in NIHE. And they graduated with the same degree. And just a couple of months ago, or early last year, he texted me and he said, "Have you got a number for Sister Gwen?" And I said, yeah, she's a nun now, my first coach. She's in an enclosed order in Stillorgan, one of the Carmelite orders. And I said, yeah, I have a number for her. And he said, okay, good. And that was it. And then I met him a couple of weeks later and I said, did you get in touch with Sister Gwen? And he said, yes, we did. And Sister Gwen's sister had also gone to NIHE in Limerick and had died 2 years previously, but the class from NIHE had got together and had signed a little card in Audrey's memory to give it to Sister Gwen to let him know. And that was what he was doing, but he didn't tell me he was doing that. And it was such a lovely thing to do. So when Colm refers to his brusqueness and everything else, he would be that kind of a forthright individual, but a heart of gold and an absolute soft, centred, caring individual when it came down to it, and did things which that team do. I know a lot of that Dublin team from the mid-70s through different connections, and that team are amazingly close with one another. They've a huge bond, and when he says he'll always be with us, they'll pause and they'll remember him, and they'll go off and they'll have their beers and their banter, and they won't ever forget, and nor should we forget him, because as people keep on reminding us with he's one of the greats, and he's gone too early. 68 years of age. He should be enjoying far many days at Croke Park watching, and he should be, still involved with UCD. And I know UCD will certainly miss him.
Roy Curtis said a piece. I was reading it last night on the Independent website. It's in the Sunday World today, and I mean it's lyrical in its quality. The way he writes about Brian Mullins. So he has lines like, Anne Olivia's William Wallace, an unbending blonde braveheart at the heart of a 1970s insurgency, a galvanising warrior prince, custodian of an aura-touching mythical level. And on it goes, and in this kind of vein, a son of a Clare father and a Kerry mother, gifted Hill 16 days, forever immune to erosion, memories that will live beyond the last breath of every witness to his titanic will. So it's a fantastically written piece. And he does mention, when I read this piece last night, I went and dug out the podcast, and I'd recommend it, because Mullins, for me, I know the deep voice, and I can imagine the hands that O'Rourke is talking about. And I did see him just crossing the road, I guess earlier this year, and even for his age of a previous generation, he's still a big presence. But Roy Curtis mentioned a 2019 interview on Shay Dalton's The 1% podcast, which I hadn't heard before, with lots of great people on it. And Roy Curtis said it offers a compelling insight into a cerebral, a reflective figure, and it reveals the smooth varnish with which he could coat sometimes sharp edges. And it was an amazing interview, and very cerebral, very thoughtful. And they're like a Clontarf child, Styles Road, Clontarf. I'm kind of in that vague area now, so I knew the place he was talking about. And he was making the point that Clontarf is this incredible sporting area. You've got the rugby pitch, the cricket pitch, tennis, soccer, and played all of those sports as well as GAA. And the only reason he ended up at Vincent's is that the Clontarf GAA under-16s team didn't have enough players to field a team. Wouldn't happen today, Jack McCaffrey's club, and they're thriving. But they didn't have an under-16s team, so someone said, well, you better just go the 2 or 3k up the road to St. Vincent's, and Kevin Heffernan's there, and the rest is history. And it's the kind of mainstay of Dublin football, Vincent's. But really great interview if anyone wants to kind of listen to his voice and hear him. Vincent's is a big thing there, Joe, as well. Like, for a guy that only went into Vincent's at 16 years of age, like, he's absolutely like idolised up there. I think it was Kevin Heffer, or someone had said, one of the Vincent's legends anyway, had said that you could just as easily see Brian Mullins on the sideline with the senior team as he could sweeping, a street on the club cleaning day or whatever. That's the way he was, and that's the way it was around Vincent's. So many legendary characters as well, and to be as accepted in at that age, like usually it's family heritage, guys coming through or girls coming through, parents played, grandparents played. A guy comes in at 16 and he's one of the greatest legends in an absolutely legendary club, and was manager when the last won the Dublin senior football title, I think 5 years ago. Still heavily involved, chairman for ages, director of football. Like, you just, as you say there, Gary, even talking about UCD, he had his hands kind of everywhere. His prints were everywhere almost. Like, and he just wanted to better people and improve people through the medium of sport. Charlie Redmond, beside that Roy Curtis piece, writes a lovely piece as well, and he makes the point, I didn't realise this, no other man has ever lost 5 All-Ireland finals to the same county. Yeah. So he lost 5 to Kerry between 75 and 85. And he says as well, I remember him fondly telling me once, Charlie, if a match is passing you by, do something, get booked, start a skirmish, do anything, get yourself into the match to make the other team take you seriously. And if you need backup in the row, don't worry, there'll be plenty there with you. So. On that backup in the row, it was basically a team amongst that Dublin team that when somebody's getting at you, Joe, you don't get him back. Somebody else takes care of business. And it was in one of the papers yesterday where Brian Mullins decided somebody was being looked after, and Brian Mullins decided it was him that was going to take care of business that day. And I think it was they were playing Tyrone, I think, and it was a fairly hardy book that was given out the punishment, but he didn't come back for any more, shall we say. Anyway, he was just such a colossus, like, as you say there. I think like, he had awful trouble with his back. Like, he used to have to lie on the floor for long periods after games to try and loosen out his back. Car crash. Yeah, and like, he was 18 months after that accident before he could get back running again. To get back running is, an achievement in itself. To get back playing to the level he could, probably athletically maybe wasn't the same, but he still had it up in the head and was able to control again from the middle of the park. Yeah, one of the pieces makes that point, that he was a different player after the crash, but pulled the strings more, which is very impressive as well. Speaks of the intelligence.
Yeah, you can't be as physical when you've been injured as badly as he was. And then, interestingly, that Dublin team and their camaraderie gave rise to a Meath team with similar camaraderie, and I don't think it's any coincidence that a Meath team would arrive on the scene with the same blueprint to the Dublin team that were dominant before them. The Dublin, Kerry, Meath teams have all one thing in common, and it's that in for one, all for one, so there's it was a great era, not that this era is any worse, but I don't think that the bond amongst the players is as strong as the bond that you see with those three teams through the 70s and 80s.
Do you not?
No.
What's that?
I just think that with the advent of social media and everything else, and the focus from, and I don't mean this in a critical sense, from the media on the teams doesn't allow for that to occur. I don't think they get that time to foster those relationships that these teams were allowed to bond. I mean, you're looking at this picture here, this of the team, and you see Brian on the periphery, and sitting front and centre is Tony Hanaho, and you just look at that team and you just go, wow, those guys are an impressive bunch. David Hickey, and how lucky were we to have them? Because they inspired each other both on and off the pitch, it seems.
To another high achiever, so we have Paula Donovan on page 66 of the Mail, which is just worth a mention. You picked this out, Gary, and even keel is the headline. So,
I mean, Paul, he fertilizes his own mystery, I think, by some of the stuff he says, and none more so than the interview he gave to David Gillick last week after the World Championship. And I presume it's purposely opaque and mystifying. Until you read what Mark Gallagher has to say about his reading materials that he swallows, and he likes reading. So he's an enigma to me because I would have thought that having achieved everything that he's achieved, that it would have dampened the flame a little bit, or that he wouldn't be as keen for success. And I've read him incorrectly, it seems. This is a guy that is just doing this for fun and for a pastime. The medals, the glory, the attention, the fame or infamy or potential wealth that might come with it are secondary, tertiary, not even gains in his book. He's completely devoid of any interest in that kind of thing, and that's what's mystifying to me. He studied physiotherapy. Now he's back into his final year of medicine. It seems to be falling right for him time-wise, that he'll finish his medicine, and then I'm not sure what he's going to do for the year prior to Paris, because he should be an intern then, and the horrific times or hours that he'll have to put in then. How's he going to do his training? But he just seems indestructible, and I full of admiration for him, full of admiration for any rower that can do anything like that. It's a sport that I find, if I wasn't a swimmer, that's the sport that I would think I would have loved to have done that. I would have loved to have done that.
Because it's miserable.
Barbaric.
Miserable, tough,
boring, and it's monotonous. And repetitive.
You're saying swimming up and down in a swimming pool and not talking or having anything.
Sorry, I wouldn't go near swimming either.
At least you could talk, Gary.
Well, you could talk at the end, but I just find that very appealing. Now, there's a bit in this article as well where obviously Paul is taking the mickey about, they're all farmers' sons, and there's a link in with the National Dairy Council, who are obviously supporting him. But so he's no fool with the media, it would seem, and I think that at times the media are being played by him, and I just say fair play to him, and I hope that he goes on and is successful in Paris as well.
Well, it's interesting. His most recent interview with David Gillick, where he was asked, so he's 5-time world champion, and what does it feel like? And he said, it's fine, yeah. And there is a performative aspect to that. I definitely, for the first time ever, heard criticism of Paula Donovan, and people said, well, maybe it had crossed the line from cute and interesting and a bit different and funny to, is it a touch too standoffish and verging on rude? That was certainly mentioned, and it was mentioned to him. And so it left some wondering, writes Mark Aller, if after Olympic gold, silver medals and everything else, he was getting blasé about success. And he said, to be fair, that's not the rude accusation. I don't think he was being rude, but certainly people thought, oh, you're being asked a question, maybe just answer the question. But he said of the blasé about success, he said, no, that's not the case at all. That's just the way I am. It was the way I felt about the race. It was fine, because he had said to David Gillick, it's fine. I don't get too excited about winning or losing. Rowing's about the challenge for me. I don't get too high or too happy about winning races, because there are going to be times when I won't be winning races, and I'd like to think I'll be fine in those days too. It's not a case of me getting blasé.
Can I just come in on the back of that?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know much about Barney Curley, the legendary racing figure. He would have organised or planned some of the greatest coups of all time in the history of racing, like unbelievable things that will never happen again. He passed away last year. He was actually honoured in Bellewstown during the week. But he always talked about, the wins. How did he deal with the wins? Did he go mad? Did he do whatever? And he would just sit in his chair and just be thinking. He always stayed level. There was no highs, there were no lows, because there were going to be loads of lows. Horses were going to die in the gallop. Paula Donovan is going to lose races, so there's going to be lows. There's going to be highs. You're going to win World Championships, you're going to win Olympics. But the really high achievers are able to stay level the whole way through, and they don't get lost in it all. And it just seems like this is just part of a plan or a process in his life or whatever. And his longevity will probably benefit massively from this, because I don't know, I'd be gone crazy if I was after winning here. I'm sure you two will be too, but it takes a special type of athlete, a special type of person to be able to stay level, and that's probably why he'd be rowing in 6 or 7 years' time.
I suspect as well he has a certain healthy disdain for the media circus. They went viral, he did the Graham Norton thing. I think he looked at it and realised, this does very little for me. I'm not going to play the part here if I don't feel like it.
Well, there's no recompense at the end of it, so why should he do it? Why should he be used by people for their entertainment? And I agree with him. Why is it up to him to entertain everyone afterwards and say something nice or funny or off the wall? I think what some of the criticism that you're referring to, again, in other aspects of the media, pertain to the fact that if you come second or third to him, or there's someone out there looking at this and their goal is to be a world champion, and this is how a world championship gold medal is received by someone who has achieved it, then why would you bother if you don't seem to get so much satisfaction out of it, or you're not even smiling when you're being told you're the world champion? So that's where it comes from.
Yes.
The joy, the elation that you should have associated with a world championship medal wasn't apparent on his face afterwards. And I'm sure there was a little bit of, skullduggery going on with him, that he was purposefully playing it down. But for other people whose lifetime goal is to be where he is standing there now, they look at that and someone might say, well, maybe it's not like I think it would be. Maybe it's exactly as he would be. But then you see McCarthy, he was just laughing in the background. And you have to take it from the fact that you're looking at the guy that knows him best, who is obviously entertained by this, and he knows that Paul, I hope, is just taking the mickey.
Yeah, just on that as well, what Gary said there. It's like, the episode of The Simpsons where Bart does that, I didn't do it, and everybody's trying to get him to say that line the whole time. It's like you're waiting for Paul O'Donovan to say something.
Yeah.
And he's refused to fall into that narrative. I have to say, I find one of the most interesting things about the two guys is Gary O'Donovan.
I know.
That I find, like, he was their sub for the Olympics. I think he was actually gone home before the race had taken place. I think Gary and Paul together, Gary was kind of maybe the one that was maybe always smiling a bit more or whatever, and Paul refuses to put in that or complete that narrative without him. But I think what he's doing now and being left in the cold somewhat by Fintan McCarthy's emergence, I think is fascinating as well. I have to say.
It's a strange dynamic.
Yeah,
for the
it
family,
really
I'm
is.
sure.
Yeah.
There is a running theme, you know. So you've had Neil O'Toole in here, and he's on one of your sound bites as well, on the off the ball, you know, about sport being important. This kind of quote that he comes out with, because when you give it up, life is absolutely. And I won't repeat what he says, but so you have. Niall, who was around when I was swimming, we were often confused with one another. You know, oh, are you the rower? And depending on who it was, I'd say, no, he's my brother, and I'm in the water, he's out of the water. And then you had that time where they had the awesome foursome that came forth in the Atlanta Olympic Games, and then you had the likes of Sam Lynch that also became a world champion in single sculls. So we have this running theme throughout, and the one thing they have in common is that they are absolutely made of steel.
Yes.
I have never seen, you know, people like them. They are tough as nails, and that's why I say it appeals to me. I would often look at those and say they're tougher, stronger, fitter, more dedicated than I am. I wonder would I have made it if I had been in that position. You know?
Well, I suspect he's very genuine when he talks about just doing it because he loves rowing, because that is the only reason you could sustain the training, is that if you just loved the craft day in and day out for years on end, because he's won more than enough to satisfy that need. And that's the great thing about him. By the way, on the criticism, I wouldn't claim to know Paula Donovan very well, but I've sat beside him once or twice at events, and is such a super nice, genuine person. Very interested, asks questions, listens, great conversationalist. And I suspect he does look at the media thing and think, I'm not the pull like a dog guy. Don't try and put me in that box. I'm not going near that again. And his reading would, well, I can only speak for myself, but I would certainly hide my Kindle if you were to read what I'm reading by comparison.
And weren't you boasting about your English degree in Maynooth during the week?
As Kenny Cunningham said, a degree from Maynooth is nothing to boast about.
We're left with a bit of egg in your face there, Joan. And in fairness, it was radio silence when we were trying to wait for these clues turned into answers, and they just didn't arrive.
Yeah.
So did you read Dostoevsky?
I was just about to say, so he's talking to Mark Galler in this piece, Paula Donovan, to unwind lately. I've been buried deep in this collection of Frank O'Connor's short stories, some interesting ones in there. They really get you thinking. And he's a good Cork author too, he explained. And he's moved on from Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, who he was reading prior to the Tokyo Games. When pressed on his favourite book from the Russian masters, O'Donovan suggests the brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky's great morality tale. One of its famous maxims is, above all, don't lie to yourself. What's your favourite, Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, Gary?
I have never read it, but then I'm not an English graduate like you, Joe.
Well, indeed. Indeed. Pretty impressive fella all round, isn't he? And trained to be a surgeon?
He's certainly finishing medical school. I'm not sure what he's going to do after that.
Right. Do you know him?
No.
All right.
No, we haven't crossed
the balance of it as well, Joe, like the fact that, like, by all accounts, they might be somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but they don't seem to have practiced that much together before the World Championship.
Yeah, they didn't. They were training apart. Yeah.
And like he was doing a lot on just a rowing machine. He hit the water at the weekends if he was lucky. It's probably going to be something similar coming into Paris, which I find fascinating. I also would like to refute something you said, Gary. There is an agricultural ignorance bred into farmers' sons. I am one of them. And if you notice, if you could see in a GA team, you could probably pick out the guys that are.
Really?
Yeah, no, you probably could. Yeah. There's a stupid thing where you'd put your head in your arm and whatever in because you're used to getting kicked by a bullock from in a crush or something like that. Or there is I do think there is an agricultural ignorance bred into guys who have been brought up around farming and have been heavily involved in it. Yeah, to their detriment sometimes.
It's funny you say that. Keith Wood was on a while back, and he did say, "I know this sounds antiquated and cliched, but Munster could do with a few more farmers in their team." Back to the roots of Munster.
I'm telling you, yeah. No, I wouldn't disagree with that now, to be honest with you. Yeah? I wouldn't disagree with that at all. There's a number one. There's like they all work hard. Don't get me wrong, but those guys were saying they're up, milking cows at 5 or 6 in the morning, miserable conditions. You're sticking your head in around the cow's elder where no one else would go. You could get a kick anywhere. Do you know what I mean? It's just you're used to taking slaps. Like my mother and father's still farming now. My mother turned 70 the other day. She's got more kicks in arms, shoulders, legs, and she just keeps coming back for more. She showed me her shoulder one time. It was black, and I was like, "Where are you going?" "Oh, I'm just going down to feed whatever." And then a dangerous heifer that would probably run at you. Do you know what I mean? It's there's a madness to it.
No, totally.
And that madness would probably reflect on the pitch as well, that they would just be fearless, I'd say, as well.
Something totally different. Wayne Rooney, page 8 of the Sunday Times. You both picked this out. It's funny, you know. I would say most weeks, one of the two guests tends to pick out Wayne Rooney's piece more often than not. He tends to have interesting things to say or something to say. This is page 8 and 9. He's looking at, it's all things Manchester derby, and he just speaks initially of, you know, Man United's plan today is going to be similar to Arsenal. They're going to have to defend deep, hit them on the break. Eric Ten Hag will have worked on distances between the players all week, closing the lines, trying to stop City, breaking them down. And, you know, he makes points like he thinks that Riyad Mahrez is going to have a big game today against Malacia, that he'll cut in on his left foot, Malacia's right foot, and expose him. So keep an eye out for that. Or if you're listening Monday, you can let us know how it went. And then he talks about Guardiola. Since I've become a coach, we've talked on the phone. We've met at City's training ground a couple of occasions. And when I was still a player with Everton, I had a good 45 minutes with him after we played at the Etihad, just chatting in the tunnel. He spoke about what he wanted from his team and how they play, etc. And he mentioned that, I suppose, pioneering, innovative aspect that is Guardiola. I remember playing Bayern Munich. It was the first time I'd ever seen fullbacks come into midfield. I remember looking at Philip Lahm in midfield thinking, what's going on here? And like, it is amazing. You watch even Zinchenko in midfield for Arsenal yesterday. All these Guardiola touches are now mimicked and commonplace. Like, it's the ultimate form of flattery. But you picked out Rooney.
I did, yeah. His column is well written and well ghosted, I presume, and it comes across as the very basics, and it's easy for me to understand. Like, when I was reading this, what stood out to me was that Wayne Rooney was understanding of the fact of how the Manchester United training would have gone this week in order to counteract Pep Guardiola's attack ambitions. And I never thought of it like that. I'm still of the, that you turn up, you're closer to this, you run a few laps, then you go through a few moves, then you do a warm down, and the kicker might stay out or the penalty taker might stay out and take a little bit more. The fascination lies in the detail of the training now, and that a lot of the training takes place in in a classroom rather than on the football pitch. Wayne himself comes across really likable in these articles and really insightful. His Derby job, which ended last year, and now he's over in the States being a manager, you can see how he understands the game. He's not just a person that turned up and played well. He actually understands it. And when he remarked upon the fact that he sees Lamb in midfield and he recognises this, he says, what is going on here? I presume a lot of the players wouldn't have recognised this changing pattern that was emerging in German football. But he was there, and he was young at this time, and he recognised that. But interesting to me was the fact that time that they were beaten by Manchester City 6-1, his wife Colleen had her birthday party that night, and he wasn't expecting to be on the end of a 6-1 drubbing. He wanted to cancel it, but there were too many people, including some of the Manchester City players who were invited to the party. And so he had to go then, and Joe Hart is one of his friends, and he's at the birthday party. And that again made me think, you would say that it is incompatible that Wayne Rooney and Joe Hart should go out for dinner after the match, because you can't imagine very many Manchester United or Manchester City fans meeting up tonight to go and celebrate anything together. But the players do. Yeah. So the players don't take it as seriously as the fans. And that's a messed up world. That is really messed up.
It's the great myth of the pantomime that they all hate each other.
I heard you talking about this during the summer. I was driving into the races one day, Joe, or one evening, and you were talking about this, that the Arsenal United rivalry there's not going to be a tunnel incident, there's not going to be anything like that. Generally, because, and I suppose part of it is to do with the international squad maybe bonding more, or they just seem to be pally a lot more. There's not going to be guys taking legs from underneath each other on the pitch right anymore.
Well, I think as well, I was just saying to Gary, we're just briefly chatting before we came on air, I think increasingly as the money has become so extreme in this world, they look at each other and it's like, God, we have so much more in common. We're the 1%. Our kids are in the same nice school, our partners were in the same nice gym. I've so much more in common with you than the fan, that increasingly we're insulated from the real world. So of course we're going to gravitate towards each other, and our partners might mix in the same circle. So like the notion, like the Liverpool and Everton players are going out for dinner as Gary's crying and ignoring Everton fans. Like, I'd say grow up, Gary. Really.
Yeah, I just find it fascinating that they could do that. And I was saying to you outside as well. During the summer or last summer, I saw a picture of Johnny Sexton and Peter O'Mahony together, and I said, that absolutely does not make sense to me, Johnny. Why are you hanging around with that guy? And you realise that Gary, he actually doesn't have this Munster bias that you have. He's actually a good friend of his. And get over it,
Ireland teammates.
Get over it, Gary, and move on with your life. And it's very easy to get drawn into this. And, the sporting rivalries are less about what goes on the pitch, as more to do with what goes on off the pitch, is what I think.
I find it very likeable that for such a high-achieving, intelligent type, you still have this naive fan.
Well, I promised myself last year, last May, that I did a charity cycle, the Ring of Beara, on the Saturday, and I came in from that, and Leinster were playing La Rochelle in the final of the European Cup, and I just got in from the cycle, and we all know what happened in that game. And then later on that night, Real Madrid were playing against Liverpool in the final of the European Cup again. And it was perhaps the most upsetting sporting day I've ever had to endure. And I promised myself after that, I'm not getting involved anymore. I'm not going to get so involved emotionally in these things. And there I was, last Friday night in the RDS, sitting there again with my Leinster season ticket going, you idiot. What are you doing to yourself? And you say, here we go again. And I know, I'll be the same again. But it's very, very, it's an antithesis to me. It's medicine for my soul to read that I really shouldn't be taking it as seriously, because Wayne Rooney doesn't take it as seriously as I would be taking it. So I should let it go.
It's funny, Gary, because the GA scene now, particularly GA club scenes, 20, 30 years ago, the thoughts of, we'll just say Burr and Coolderry would have a rivalry. The thoughts of Burr and Coolderry players mingling together on a night out or having drinks together, unheard of.
Right.
Now, it's just becoming more commonplace. It just is. I'm Burr, we mingle with Rhinus, we mingle with Coolderry, we mingle with Drumcullen, whatever. It's just, I don't know, the world has changed, I suppose.
But you're a nice chap. You see, everyone likes you.
I haven't seen him on a pitch yet, in fairness. That's interesting.
No, that has softened an awful lot.
And do you consider that a bad thing?
Oh, part of me does, part of me doesn't.
Yeah,
but it's
nice
just because it is. I was on a couple of months ago here when they're talking about rivalries. Like, to me, bitter is always better when it comes to a rivalry. But that's just me. And maybe it's because I'm not 18 or 19 and I'm not on Instagram and see it with young lads. The way the world has changed, I suppose, and you have to adapt to that. But it can be a bit unsettling at times when you see your own players maybe, really pally and friendly with lads that potentially you were trying to kill, a couple hours previous.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Your
generation are more mature than like you.
Potentially.
Grumbling over your pints and why are we talking to them? Right, let's press on because we're going to be out of time if we keep up this pace. So we've talked about Brian Mullins, Paula Donovan, Wayne Rooney's piece there. Paul Kimmage's piece in the Sunday Independent, page 21, is very interesting. I suppose you flick onto it and what captures the eye first of all is that there's a photograph and three members of the photograph are very recognisable if you're a golf fan at all. This is at the Alfred Dunhill, which is really, if you're a non-golfing fan, this is where the winners of life congregate for a week every year.
You're here, Joe.
I know, like, I can't look at it. It's too upsetting. It just kills me. So celebrities, high-achieving types play in the Pro-Am with players. And so you have Rory McIlroy, his father Jerry, they're in a team together, and you recognise Danny Willett, and they're on the, I presume it's on the Swilcan Bridge, St Andrews. And then there's a face that I don't recognise, I don't think most readers would recognise. Jimmy Dunn is his name. And so Paul Kimmage, as is his wont, is following the McIlroys around, and he's taking notes on the match they're having, McIlroy and his father against Danny Willett and this guy Jimmy Dunn. And it starts off, and Jimmy Dunn and Danny Willett are behind, and then they start pulling back the lead, and Jimmy Dunn turns to Jerry McElroy and said, "Where's the reporter?" In brackets, he's looking at me, says Paul Kimmage. "I hope you're writing this down," says Jimmy Dunn, waving a notebook. "One of the great comebacks," he laughs. And Paul Kimmage says, "But there's a better one." And then that leads into Jimmy Dunn's story, which is, I suppose, quite something. And again, you find yourself in this piece reading about somebody you don't know, but it's about how September 11th changed his life. He came through at Notre Dame, a degree in economics, was on Wall Street with his best friend who he met playing golf, Chris Quakenbush, or Q, or Quack as he's called. And they ended up working at a company together, Sandler O'Neill. By 1993, the company was thriving, had moved into a gleaming office on the 104th floor at the World Trade Center. And September 11th happens. Jimmy Dunn is on a golf course when it happens. And he left his clubs in the tee, raced back to the clubhouse. He knew from the moment he set eyes on the TV that that's his colleagues, could not have survived. Quack, that's his best friend who ended up also working at the same company. Quack, Herman, the owner, his assistant, Deborah Paris. The company employed 171 people on the 104th floor of the South Tower. 83 had gone to work that morning. 66 had died of the 171 people who worked for the company. Rushes back to New York, and I guess the amazing part of the piece, he would rebuild the company. This is the vow he made himself. He would rebuild the company, honour his friends and colleagues for the rest of his life. Their families would receive their salaries and health coverage. Any bonus due would be doubled, and he would set up a trust to fund the education of their children. 21 years later, he's honoured every pledge. Now it's Wednesday at the Old Course, and he has golf on his mind, the game that saved his life. And at a point, Paul Kimmage asked him about when he went back to play golf and how he got back into it, and he talked about playing Augusta with Billy Payne a few months afterwards. That was how he got back into it. And he holds up his ball, and it's marked, and on the ball is a Q. So Q being, for Quack, his best friend. So a fellow who's carrying those victims of September 11th around with him. And that's, I suppose, a synopsis of the piece, which is worth reading for the full treatment. But yeah, a really nice way to go and cover this golf tournament, unexpected way. And like I said, you recognise three faces in that piece, and maybe the most interesting man is the one you don't recognise.
I wouldn't have known Jimmy Dunn from Adam, like, being honest with you. And I think the thing about a really good piece is that you don't necessarily know the characters involved, and it draws you in. And I said it to you off air, Joe, as well. I think the way Paul has written it, it's peculiar. Usually a lot of the best stuff goes at the start and you draw the reader in. To me, is all the best stuff at the end. So I stay reading, and it's like they always say in journalism, you have to have a payoff at the end. Like, the payoff comes in a great amount at the end. I think it's a fascinating story. It's just fascinating that he's gone back and rebuilt the company and just made sure that people's lives who were unimaginably affected, he has done as much as he could possibly do to make sure that life continued with some sort of order.
Because for the first part of it, the jealous, petty type in me is looking at this guy going, okay, I'm delighted for this Wall Street guy who's playing golf with them, you know, making me sick here. Yeah. And by the end, very different perspective.
Yeah. And it's very easy to judge people straight off, you know, and there's a degree of envy about the situation in which he finds himself. And then when you find out what he had to do to get to that point in his life, you say, oh, yes. Now I feel bad about how I felt about it.
He's allowed play. I'll let him play. Yeah.
But you know, it's part of the Rory circle. You know, there's so much going on around Rory McIlroy that is just so fascinating, and Rory seems to attract and engage these individuals that are phenomenal, as you say, achievers, but just great human beings. And it's no coincidence that there they are, the four of them together. I mean, Jerry looks like the happiest man in the world.
Yeah, doesn't he just?
He is living the life.
As I watch Jerry live the life, I think, good on you.
Yeah.
Worked 2 jobs, did it all for the love of his son. There wasn't a guaranteed investment in, like, it's all going to come up good. Even though he did put that bet on him to win the Open before he was 25. Yeah. But it's lovely to see him enjoy it now.
Yeah, and just I would say every day is Saturday for Jerry. You know, it's just an amazing life that he has for himself, or that Rory has given him. And there's a huge amount of pressure on Rory to keep on doing that for him. But it's the characters around Rory McIlroy that are equally as fascinating as Rory himself, because you get the impression from this piece that Rory doesn't let people in to that circle unless they are going to contribute to the Rory McIlroy universe, and they've got to be worthy of being in his presence. He does. I wouldn't say, I don't know Rory McIlroy, I wouldn't say he suffers fools at all. It's interesting to see that a guy like this that we knew nothing about, we're now talking about, and he is obviously has admirable qualities that Rory looks at him and says, yeah, I like what you did, you know, that's simple, you know, you're true, honest, you endeavoured to do it. Now there's lots of people that lost people in the Twin Towers who made pledges and promises who weren't able to deliver, but not through lack of effort. But this guy had the ways and means and the effort and the money in order to see his promises through. It's a lovely piece, you know, and you know, declaring my interest here, Paul is a great friend of mine. I love reading his piece. I think that his pieces are often worth the price of the paper alone. So it's great. And I love when he writes on this kind of periphery. He's just got a wonderful way about him. He's a great storyteller.
Well, a part of it reads like a novel, you know. It's got that quality. That point you make about Rory's Circle is very interesting. And even the Pro-Am circuit, so week to week, every Wednesday, he's playing in a Pro-Am. I mean, it does strike me that for a lot of these golfers, in the same way that the Queen, the late Queen, thought that the world smelt of fresh paint, was the old saying, these guys must think the world is full of millionaires and high achievers, because they're invariably the people they play Pro-Ams with. They have such access to such interesting people if, like I suspect Rory is, they're interested enough to recognise this is the greatest networking opportunity you could ever have. Like every Wednesday I get to meet these potentially brilliant people.
Yeah, well what the piece says about the reason that he was not in the Twin Towers that day was that he was playing in a Pro-Am, and that he was playing 200 games of golf a year whilst he was working as a stockbroker. So he's obviously very, very good at his job, but has another side to him, which is obviously the personality side of things. But Rory's one mistake, if you want to call it that, was that he did go playing with Donald Trump, and then he turned around and people picked him up on it and said, why did you do that? And he said, well, the President of the United States calls you and says you want to play a game of golf, you know, you're going to see what the President is like. I mean, I've got to go. But that was it. He's done, went in, out of Rory's circle, gone, good night. I don't, I'm not doing this again. And then that was it. No apologies. He'll see it, judge it for himself and move on. Very admirable young man. And what age is he now, Joe? 32?
Yeah. And he's playing the golf of his life.
32.
Like,
amazing.
I think the wider sports audience still looks at him and thinks, God, he hasn't won a major. What's going on here? Is he throwing it all away? What he's done the last year is super impressive. He was so unlucky not to win a major this year. I think next year he could easily win 2 majors. Like I think he's about to explode. So he's done so well on that. He's not all the live golf, all the publicity, all the trappings that are going on with him ever increasingly have not detracted from his golf. He's actually put in serious work in the last year as well.
Looks like there could be a maturity there. Like, you know, you see a lot of guys like hurlers and footballers tend to hit a peak even at around that age. Golf is a bit different, but like he could hit a peak now and it could just roll for 5 to 6 years.
I think he's looking at 10 years of consistency now and could well have it. So that's McIlroy. The concussion comes up in 2 different pieces. So the Sunday Times, the piece is called the Contact Conundrum, and then Danger Zone Mail on Sunday. So you picked out these pieces, Gary. This is sports, contact sports, never ending.
So I'm looking over there on your wall of glory there, and you've got a Northwestern football helmet there. They were in town a couple of weeks ago, and I'm a big fan of American college football. So last week, one of the most recent graduates of American college football to make his name in professional football is the Miami quarterback, who I know as Tua, but is Tua Tagovailoa. And I was saying to a colleague of mine at work on Monday, you want to see what this guy endured when he got hit by the Buffalo Bills last night. And he got up and he was wobbling, and then he stopped, and then he walked a little bit more, and he wobbled a little bit more, and they took him off for a HIA. And it was quite obvious that this guy had a bad concussion. So he went off, came back on at half-time, and led the Miami Dolphins to victory over the Buffalo Bills. Now, anyone that was watching that match, and I was watching it live, would have said, that's crazy, that guy should never be back on. Yeah. So they had a game then on Thursday night.
4 days later.
4 days later, and they were playing against Cincinnati, I think it was. And he got sacked. But he didn't just get sacked. It was a vicious throw to the ground, vicious now. But that's what's encouraged in American football. But when he fell to the ground, he hit his head. And he had a fit live on TV. And the game stopped for 7 minutes whilst he was taken off the pitch, and he was brought to hospital, and there hasn't been an update. But this guy has been on my radar for the last 3 years because in his last college football game for Alabama, he was a Heisman Trophy candidate. He was going for a record number of touchdowns, and he had no reason to be on the pitch. Alabama were up by 50 points, but he wanted to play on, and the reserve quarterback wanted to come on for the college. And he refused to come off because he wanted to play one last play. And in that last play, he got caught from behind by an opponent, and he had a fractured dislocation of his hip. Now, that is a seriously bad injury to have. And then he put himself into the draft. So he was patched up by the orthopedic surgeons, fractured hip, can be career-ending. And he was picked by the Miami Dolphins, even though he wasn't going to, he couldn't actually walk when he was being picked in the draft. And he's done well for the Miami Dolphins. Wonderful player. But he's quite an amazing athlete, but yet is a pure commodity when it comes down to it for the Miami Dolphins. Nothing more than you get on there, you throw the ball, and you make us win. We don't care about your concussion. And it's a seriously bad advertisement for the sport. So that was one piece. And then the other piece was the piece in the Independent, is it? It's Peter,
I
don't have it in front of me.
Peter O'Reilly in the Sunday Times.
Yeah,
he spent the week with Leinster.
Yeah, he goes out to the Leinster Training Academy, and they go through it at level 2. Is it level 2 that they've got contact but no heavy contact? And this is how Stuart Lancaster is treating the whole head injury and protecting his players. And I think it's in stark contrast to what the Miami Dolphins did, and that's why I wanted to highlight the two pieces, because as a doctor and loving the sport of rugby, I just think that rugby has come to accept this and work around it a little bit better than American football. And yet we had the piece during the week that we have the 3 Irish players who are now suing their provinces and the IRFU for post-concussion syndrome and the adverse effects of their rugby on their well-being now that they're in their 40s and 50s. So it's watch this space, with interest.
The Peter O'Reilly week with Leinster was very, very interesting. I mean, it's great insight, and so he spends the week with them. They're trying to be proactive rather than reactive, they say. So on Monday, for instance, the centrepiece, 35 minutes of non-stop rugby, noisy, frantic, yet controlled, 30 players, 2 balls, pausing only to set up starter plays that have been walked through in the gym already. As Gary said, players operated at level 2 contact, which is same speed as a match, but with controlled contact, mock breakdowns rather than real collisions. Intense enough to force decision-making under pressure and to test skills. How often do they go to level 3, which is live rugby? Hardly ever, says Lancaster. Forwards might do a little when they're defending live mauls or live scrums. Lancaster was part of the World Rugby Working Party that came up with a recommended weekly contact limit of 15 minutes spread over at least 2 sessions. And Peter O'Reilly asked him, is there ever a temptation to do more? And he says no. His coaching philosophy all about playing to space. So it was a great insight, and I guess they talk later in the piece about how biomarkers to check for concussion instantly is the holy grail, and they're not quite there yet. But the mouth guards are now common in the Gallagher Premiership and already used by some Leinster players, and they can measure the force of the collisions. They can't tell you if you're concussed, but they can tell you what you were hit with. And there seems to be a real, in fairness to them, awareness at Leinster. Like Will Connors is embarking on a PhD on the benefits of improved tackle techniques, and they talk a bit about tackle technique in this piece and how if there are routine concussion victims owing to poor tackle technique, they really focus on working with them. And later on, Lancaster talks about rules that he would change at the breakdown to try and limit what we saw happen with Bundyaki last weekend, and he makes his case there. And he also says, by the way, let's speed up the game, have a higher ball and play time, and it follows that you'll need more athletic and lighter players with lighter collisions, as opposed to, South Africans, for instance, time wasting in the Lions tour so they can keep their beefier players on for longer and have bigger hits as a result. Does the medical professional in you, when you're sitting there watching Leinster, increasingly, and that High Court case, do you find yourself taking less joy from the physicality?
I think last week when I was at the game and you saw Keelan Doris go off very early for a HIA and not come back on, I think that I'm actually impressed by how proactive they are and how they'll always err on the side of caution. Yeah. Going way back to when Brian O'Driscoll wasn't allowed back onto the pitch by the Irish doctor at the time, Jim McShane, who kept him in the changing rooms even though Brian wanted to go back on saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. He said, you're absolutely not fine, we're keeping you here. And Ireland went on and lost the game with Brian off the pitch. So it's that kind of discipline is impressive, and despite that, we're going to see people who are suffering. But those are the risks of the game. And they don't take unnecessary risks, it would appear, unlike the American football. Like, Michael, when you were training, did you always wear your helmet in training?
Yeah, no, I did. I always wore it, yeah.
Does everyone?
Generally in hurling now, yeah, since the helmets were brought in, nearly everything is helmets on. Yeah, it's like one definitely good advancement that we've made. Now, you probably would question some of the helmets are legacy helmets that have been going around for 20 years. Like my helmet is quite old. Like whether it would pass, technically, whether it would pass the protocol of a helmet that has got the stamp on it now, I probably think it wouldn't, and I'd say a lot of guys wouldn't. But they do. We definitely would wear the helmets a lot more than we would have before. Yeah.
So you're still on your motorbike, Joe? Do you still ride?
Yeah.
And when did you change your helmet last? And do you have the same helmet now that you bought with your first bike?
No.
No, so you changed it. Why?
4 years maybe, because I dropped the other one.
Yeah, okay.
That was quite, it was fine, it wasn't damaged, but I dropped it and I thought,
okay,
there was a nagging voice at the back of my mind saying,
right, well, you're unlike most people who, obviously, but most helmets, they're just worn for this, for the sake of wearing them, and, no one takes care of them. So not wearing helmets, and in which the game of rugby doesn't wear helmets, and those head guards that some of the guys wear, whether they're protective or not, because you've got the coup and contra coup type of injuries that will bring about concussion. The jury is out on them whether they work, and most people are wearing them to protect their ears, rather than their head. Does it make me want to fall out of love with the game of rugby? No. I think that everyone, and there are smarter and more involved people than I who are addressing this problem, but there's no simple answer to it, or else we would have it. Tackle technique, etc. That's fine, but they do talk in this piece, this Peter O'Reilly piece about. And they asked Stuart Lancaster about, what do you do then when you're coming up against a French team like La Rochelle? And what La Rochelle did to Leinster last year in the final is completely different. But Leinster almost made it. They were 90 seconds away from pulling off a great escape. Yeah. But you just have to get physical with them. And then it becomes, that kind of a game is... I don't like that game. I like the Lancaster play into space. Keep it loose and free. But most games aren't like that either.
Just quickly on the helmet issue, racing is one sport that has really they've really gone after how can they protect the jockeys as much as possible. I don't know if you saw Ross Ryan, the Galway jockey, basically been pushed or elbowed off a horse the other day.
I didn't see it. I read about it.
It was very, very bad. And Christoph Soumian, who is riding in the Arc Triumph today, which he shouldn't really be like. He got 60-day ban since. But had he not been wearing this reinforced helmet, this reinforced back protector, like, I'd shudder to think what the consequences were. But it's definitely one sport that has really gone after how can we our jockeys are going to fall, how can we protect them as much as possible. I remember chatting to a jockey, Sean Flanagan I think it was, he got kicked on the ground, his helmet cracked, the kick of the horse. But had he not, like he said, he changed helmets recently before that, and had he not, I shudder to think what the consequences were. But they've really gone after that element of protecting the jockeys as much as possible, and like this consequence of that the other day could have been catastrophic were he not wearing the protective gear that he was.
There's a very famous photo of Nicky English, with running through when he was playing for Tipperary. Have you seen that one? With the hurl underneath his nose, someone coming across his face. And you just go, wow, that is just incredible. That he's just caught in a moment of time by Billy Stickland, I think. And so your sport, that you love, I look at that and I just go, that's madness, But you're very reliant on other people's skill in order. So the higher the level, the safer it becomes, I presume.
100%. Everybody knows how to protect themselves a lot more, and there's a lot. That's why a lot of the stuff you'd see would be in junior A, B, and C, where there's a lot of wildness.
Right.
Yeah.
It was like a dance at the top level. In close contact.
Kind of. But to go and play at that lower level, that's where you learn how to protect yourself. If you can protect yourself at that level, you'll be fine at inter-county.
How many fingers have you broken?
Not too many. Thumb, index finger, couple, bits and pieces. I'm sure they're all out of place anyway.
Never met a hurler who hadn't.
Yeah, no.
You picked out a piece. Speaking of GAA, so I mean, look, you love your GAA, and you, like lots of GAA journalists, are thinking, well, how do we cover this new reality post the split season? So you like the famous Callahan boys in the Sunday Times, for instance?
Yeah, I did indeed. I'm heading down to the Laois hurling final after I finish up here. It's a nice few county finals today. There's loads over the next 4 weekends, a huge amount of them. But this is kind of a fascinating story. So the three Cahallans, Jack, Damien and Connor, they hurled for St Finbarrs, but they play football for Castlehaven. So in a scenario that you would only see in the GA, Castlehaven footballers are playing St Finbarrs in football this week. So they played for the Bars last week and booked a place in the county final. I think they're trying to win it for the first time since '83. And now they're playing against a heap of the lads that they played with last week. And Christy O'Connor just goes into it here. Just give a brief bit of context. He just says, when Clondegad and Cora Clare met in last year's Clare Senior Football Relegation semi-final, Cora Clare were instantly bailing water from a sinking ship. Clondegad should have been out of sight at half time. They led by 8 points entering the fourth quarter. Their final winning margin was 15. Clondegad advanced to a relegation decider against Kilrush, which they won. Cora Clare went down. Damien Burke and Pierce Lillis had no time or inclination to feel sorry for themselves, so they were hurling for Ballyea against Kilmaley in a hurling quarter final, and they were going to be playing with a load of the guys who had put them in a load of trouble the week before. And the quotes go in here. So Pierce and Tony Kelly, Pierce Lillis was marking Tony Kelly in football. They went at it like they never knew each other. They were boxing each other off the ball. This is in football. And then a week later, they're playing hurling, and they eventually win a county title together and have played in the Club All Ireland. It's just, I don't know, the club is fascinating in that way. And I think the media have to deal with the split season. As the split season is going to be here to stay now, and we need to really go after, like, there's so many good stories in the club season. Andy Moran retired yesterday from Balladreen. He was obviously on the football pod a couple of years ago. Got a guard of honour walking out, was presented with a jersey, scored 3-3 as only Andy could in his last game. There are stories like that. Andy's in 39. There are guys, Kieran McManus is 46, playing senior B midfield for Tubber. Like, there's stories that length and breadth of the country, including this about the Cahallans as well. Fascinating stuff that at inter-county it's just a lot more sanitised, shall we say. You just won't see this type of thing. And in fairness to club players, I could count them on hand the amount of times I've been turned down for an interview for a club player coming up to a county final. Like, you couldn't ring an inter-county player a month before, and it had to be at some sort of a press gig or something like that. So I think the access is great. The access is there. It's just a matter of, I think, the media taking advantage of it.
And for you, what marks success? Like previous people who sat in that seat, and we talked about this issue, have bemoaned the fact that you just can't get that national interest in a given club game on a given weekend. Do you see a point in the next couple of years where you might get 500,000 watching a club game on TV, or will it always just have limited interest levels, and that's okay? It's a participation move as opposed to...
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're ever going to get 500,000, bar, you know, it's maybe you have a superstar like David Clifford playing in a game where everybody wants to see it. But like, if you were to, like, we've 82,000 people come to Croke Park, 82,300 for the All-Ireland final. They attend that and they'll watch that.
Yeah.
But if you, over the next 4 weekends, if you were to accumulate the attendances at county finals that enter the country, and semi-finals and quarter-finals, like, that would blow the All-Ireland out of the water.
It's a great way to look at it.
Completely blow it out of the water. Like, David Clifford played for Fossa in the Kerry Junior Football Championship, and there was a pitch invasion after, about 100 kids just running down to him. Like, that's... people say that we're not going to see our heroes. I don't buy it, because whatever club you are, Joe, or whatever club you are, Gary, you're going to see them. You're going to see them. They're 5 minutes away. Go and watch them. And like, my heroes growing up, Johnny Pilkington, Brian Whelan, Rory Hannafy, I got to play with them all. They were such easy access to me, and they're the guys I still go back to. So every young kid, every guy and girl has their heroes very close to their doorstep.
So it doesn't matter if there's not mass national attention on one given game. It's the multitude combined.
Yeah, I don't think it, and I don't know if there's ever going to be on one particular game.
I think so either.
Yeah, barring an All-Ireland club final, which is like a Ballygunner and a Ballyhale, which has a mass appeal because you've TJ Reid and the Mahanys and lots of big names. But focus on, like the coverage in the Midland Tribune of the Offaly finals. Outstanding. Pages upon pages upon pages of access and information that all the locals will read. It'll be the same. Will O'Callaghan will be on Midland Sport today, waxing lyric about the Offaly hurling final, and all the focus will be on that. And then you move to Laois and it'll be the same in Laois. Nationally, maybe it's a bit more difficult, but there's still lots of really good stuff to go after nationally.
And so the key point there is some people will come on and say, well, this is going to be a death knell for the GAA. They're giving up, this portion of the summer when they could have national attention. But if each local media is invested in the local game, then it's fine.
Oh yeah, 100%.
It's thriving.
It's thriving within those counties. It mightn't look like it nationally, but it's thriving within those clubs and counties.
Very good. Okay, I'll come to your Formula 1 piece in just a second, Gary. I just want to give brief mention. Alison Rudd just sums up an interesting week. We've talked about Qatar quite a bit in this slot, so just if you weren't following what's happened this week, she puts 2 points together. Hummel, first of all, they provide the kit for Denmark, and they have decided to block out their logo from Denmark shirts as a form of protest. We don't want to be visible during a tournament that's cost thousands of people their lives, is what Hummel have said now. And she does make the point. The company was praised. However, the stance can also be regarded as a publicity stunt that does more to promote the brand than highlight the deaths caused by poor working conditions in Qatar. It's very hard indeed not to look self-serving in such circumstances. If the Denmark team are happy to wear the new monochrome kit, should they be content to be in Qatar at all? You could argue they're being hypocritical. But she does praise Hummel, I guess, for starting something of a conversation. And then just the other point, she talks of it being some kind of progress. And she does remark on what happened with the Iran team this week as well, which you may have missed. And the context here is interesting. So at the World Cup in Russia, the captain of the Iran team, he was asked at that World Cup, and this I missed this 4 years ago, to be honest. He was asked if he welcomed playing in front of female fans. And he refused to answer, saying it would be disrespectful to the competition to discuss the issue. I prefer to solve our family within our family. I prefer to solve our problem within our family, he said. And Alison Rudd makes the point, fast forward 4 years, Iran's football team covered their country's symbols with their jackets during the national anthems before a friendly against Senegal on Tuesday as part of the countrywide protest after the death of that 22-year-old woman on September 16th. She'd been arrested by Iran's morality police for violating the strict Islamic dress code. And she makes the point that is quite the progression from wanting to keep any disquiet over the rights of women in Middle East a private matter 4 years ago. And now she said it may sound small, but keeping your jacket on marked a shift in mood and, yes, levels of bravery. So that was quite an interesting development from the Iran football team. The subjugation of Iranian women is not cultural, she writes, but political, and therefore a political gesture was entirely appropriate. So that was Alison Rudd just summing up, I guess, the bubbling sport politics situation, the Iran football team and Hummel, the Denmark jersey manufacturer. Gary, you picked out Formula One piece. Are you a Drive to Survive type, or have you always liked it?
Always liked it. Went to my first Grand Prix in the early 90s, actually, and I've been to a couple since. And people tend to love or hate it. And when you talk to people about Grand Prix, often they're looking at you saying, why on earth would you waste your time at that sport? And then the drive...
Can I read a sentence? Actually,
Yes.
this is why this sport to me does not...
Not a sport. Not a sport is what you're going to say.
Oh, it's a sport.
Okay.
It's a sport. But I mean, like, the way Michael talked about the Callans there, that human interest.
Yeah.
Whereas this piece in The Observer, how's this to knock your head off with emotion, Michael? The low drag concept, this is about the new Red Bull car. The low drag concept, allied to a powerful engine and a Newey, that's their engineer,
Newey,
his brilliant exploitation of the new ground effect aerodynamic rules delivered one of Red Bull's most complete cars for almost a decade. This is what get this man up at 5 in the morning to watch this.
There's a lights out Grand Prix in Las Vegas next year, November 2023.
Okay.
Starts at 10 p.m. at night. I'm a big Vegas fan. I'd
Go to that. I know this.
I'm going to that now if I cut it on. If I'm
reasonable.
Yeah.
The point here is Red Bull have been utterly dominant. Is that it?
Yeah. Well, no, the point is, first and foremost, there is fuel to the fire for the people that hate Grand Prix and don't think it's a sport. Because there's a huge commotion over the weekend about Lewis Hamilton refusing to take out his nose stud whilst he was racing in the Formula One car, okay? So when people who don't like Grand Prix read a story like that, they're just going, come on, folks, you know. So he wasn't fined, but Mercedes were fined $25,000 for allowing him to drive the car during qualifying with his nose stud in place, okay? Lewis Hamilton has come back and saying the nose stud is soldered in place, it cannot come out, and he has a doctor's letter of exemption. So you can see these people now at home going, I told you, it's nonsense, it's a stupid thing, why would you waste your time? Then you have the threatened legal action by Christian Horner and Toto Wolff, who are the principals, the team principals for Red Bull and for Mercedes-Benz. And that's what it's all about, really. The drivers are secondary to this, except for Lewis Hamilton, who transcends the whole sport at the moment because he's untouchable, really. Not in terms of winningness, but in terms of what he can say, what he can do, and what he can get away with. But the two team principals hate one another, and they're threatened legal action. But this legal action could spill over to the championship decider last year. Do you remember everyone was getting all excited about this, that there was whoever won, and then Lewis Hamilton? It would appear, as a Hamilton fan, that Lewis Hamilton was hard done by in that race when they allowed the lapped cars, some of them, to pass him out, to bring Verstappen up closer to him so that Verstappen could pass him on the last lap. And so there is that interest in the background, and that's what fascinates me. That's why I think it's a fascinating 2 hours of entertainment that I watch it for. I watch every Grand Prix and I record it. I'll watch the qualifying. And I have gotten into a Formula 3 car. And when you get into a Formula 3 car, which is a single-seater car, and you're driving that around, you just think, my God, how can those guys do this? You know, you get out after one lap, your heart rate is about 160, you're profusely sweating, you're jammed in there. It's like being in a coffin-like environment trying to steer a car around, and these guys are doing it at such huge speeds. So they are tremendously skilled, tremendously highly skilled.
I didn't think there was it's not a sport, is it?
And only 20 of them in the world.
Argument. Yeah, of course. I think most people think it's a sport. I mean, I wouldn't put much truck in the argument it's not. Aside from the technical aspects, which to me are just imperceptible, like the human aspect of this is amazing. I mean, the drama last year was off the charts, and I mean, some of the best documentaries and pieces of television like Senna and even Drive to Survive are exceptional. I would find the Grand Prix themselves, the 2 hours, tough enough work to stay with, but the big picture stuff is amazing.
Well, that's very... It's like in hurling, when I'm watching hurling, I'll be very, very reliant on the commentators or the expert analysis to tell me what exactly I should be looking out for and going, you know, looking for. Hurling, GAA the same. Other sports I can look at and I can watch and I can understand what's going on. But when it comes to Grand Prix motor racing, you are absolutely 100% reliant on the guy that's commentating and to tell you what's going on or what the tactics are going to be and what you should be looking out for. And that's what makes it. And at the moment, they do have a great commentary team with Sky. That, allied to the Drive to Survive Netflix series, has brought in an awful lot of more fans to the whole thing. And going there or watching it for 2 hours, you've got to really pay attention to what the commentators are saying, because you can get lost then. And in actual fact, last year or the year before when Hamilton won it, not last year, but the year before when Hamilton won it and ran away with it, in the same way as Verstappen is running away with it this year, the actual races themselves are a little bit boring.
Yeah.
You know, and you really want, everyone watches the start because you want to see a pile up at the first corner. Everyone watches the first few laps to see whether, you know, their favourite, like today, Verstappen, can he make it from 8th place up into 1st place? How long will it take him to overtake?
Yeah.
You know, and when he comes up behind Hamilton, who's going to be in 3rd place, what's going to happen? It's all very predictable, but yet I find it addictive. And for someone who likes other sports where there's less of the external influences in terms of team strategy, engines, fuel load, tyres, etc., I sometimes surprise myself about how interested I am in this when I actually think part of it is pantomime-like. I don't know whether that makes sense.
Yeah, well, like the thing I remember most from Formula 1 is Schumacher running Damon Hill off the track in Adelaide in '94. Like they're the things you remember, or Senna's lap in the rain at Silverstone. Remember that, where he, I don't know, overtook a crazy amount of people, and the pile-ups at the first corner usually as well.
Did you watch last year, Michael?
No, I didn't. No, I haven't got back into it, to be honest with you. I haven't got back into it. I'm good for doing things after the fact. Like I watch things when they're no longer popular, when they were in vogue maybe 5 years previous. So I'll maybe go back and watch Drive to Survive when everybody else is talking about something else.
Well, not everyone loves Grand Prix. I can tell you that because, you know, I know a man who's sitting at this table here that took his wife to a Melbourne Grand Prix for their anniversary, and it wasn't really appreciated. So,
this is like
when we lived in Australia, I'd say now.
Sorry. Okay, fair enough.
It's like Homer Simpson getting the bowling ball for marriage for her birthday.
Be a long flight home. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It went down like a lead balloon.
We are pretty much out of time. I've got to be on the radio in 5 minutes. Before we go, Michael, you have a big evening that I know you've put a lot of work into. Do you want to give it a plug and a mention, because it's for a great cause as well?
Yeah, just fair play to the lads in the Sindo. They managed to put on number 11 aside the Offaly Hurling County Final story by Dermot Crowe. But we have a big fundraiser in the County Arms Hotel on Thursday, October 13th, reeling in the hurling years. We've got Anthony Daly, Eddie Brennan, Dan Shanahan, Cyril Farr and Michael Dignan, our own legends, Brian Whelan and Johnny Pilkington. We have two special guests on the night as well, jockey Barry Geraghty and Mickey Hart. And it's all we're doing a big, huge redevelopment work in St Brendan's Park, where the Offaly final will be played next year, again, for the first time in 17 years. And there'll be a bit of a question of sport on the night as well. It should be a cracking night now, hoping to pack out the place. So you can get tickets on Eventbrite, /reeling in the hurling years, I think it is. So yeah, I'd love to see you. I'd love to see everybody there on the night. We should have great crack, yeah.
Great. So Eventbrite /
reeling in the hurling years, yeah. Go to Eventbrite and it'll pop up anyway. Or give me a text or DM me or contact me in any way. There are tickets there to go for a limited time, I'd say, because the demand is getting quite strong, which is great.
Okay, good man. Thank you both very much for coming to the studio. Gary O'Toole, Michael Verney, pleasure, fellas. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.